So, in the answering of the what, I have to get a little bit more personal to my particular what and my personal story. And coming from the why, I myself can see how not seeing what's right in front of me kept me from growing up. From the what. And again, like the force of nature that is actually trying to take me with it into the next season to be best prepared and best suited. In my reluctance, I held back that growth. And again, in my personal story, it involves so many emotions for why that was the case, from denial to optimism to hope to positive thinking. I'll tell you a sliver of this as I make a case of how I'm saying in life we need internal reasons, internal pressure, and to not ignore and actually embrace that internal pressure despite the discomfortable next step it's trying to force us to become and bud into. And without those reasons, like I said, we can easily become stagnant while nature takes course outside our walls and eventually catches up to us. I'll make this case for these internal reasons with a cute story my mom told me the other day. Quick background: in the Indian culture, we believe women are the prosperity of the household. In the Hindu religion, the deity of money and prosperity is a woman who we pray to throughout the year and especially on special occasions like the New Year called Diwali. So, as my mother tells me the story, I see the theme that I keep saying keeps coming back. The theme of how, even if you don't believe in the religious story that a woman is prosperity, even if you don't believe that, how a woman who comes into a man's life to help start and complement his family can, even in the most practical, non-religious of senses, in the most practical of senses, still be the source of prosperity. And my mother's story of when she first got married and the conditions under which my father's house was, to the comforts and riches that I got to experience growing up, which was a stark contrast. In her story, she was describing how the house and how hot it was and how hot it used to be and how the roof used to leak and how all these different things. And in the cute part of the story, she tells me how the house used to have large windows and open parts of the wall that opened up to the courtyard, or how the rooms were configured together. I'm not exactly clear. And she said how scared she used to be at night when she first got married because she was right by those windows, and my mother is scared of bugs and lizards and anything breathing remotely heavy. So she tells me how in her fear, she would hold my dad really close and how she would stick to him all night. And she laughs and tells me how he would get annoyed, like, oh my God, it's so hot and you just stick to me all night. And she was laughing because she's like, I had no choice. I was scared. And what's funny and what brings home the point I'm trying to make is that the next thing that happened was the first time in 1980 in my father's household, they brought home a cooler, which is an old school AC with a water tank. So the story goes, my mother's cute fear created so much heat and annoyance for my father that a need for a cooler was created. And that need took their family into the next step of riches and prosperity. And so goes to the point of about how, even in the most practical of senses, detached from any religious theming, you can see how the expansion to your life that comes from the needs that are created by a woman in your life, it can be anything else as well. In a sense, the need created by your sense of responsibility is what it really means. That's why it can be anything else. But in a sense, it's the need created by your sense of responsibility, in this sense, for her comfort and happiness. And so your own damn body temperature can just remain cool. And this is because of the need she creates. So this cute story and how it stuck out to me, again, what brought back me talking about the shift for me and how it all relates, and the internal reasons and the invitation to prosperity I've been gating, stopping by the responsibility I've been avoiding. The invitation to prosperity that hides behind the responsibility. The need that it creates because of the needs of so many other parts of us. We don't fight the invitation to the damn internal pressure a woman brings because she comes with so many perks. But we don't see all other responsibility as attractively as that right off the bat. Most responsibilities don't come dressed in booty shorts with thick thighs or whatever your flavor is. I guess you know what my flavor is now. You get my point. To talk more specifically about my what and my reason to grow that I've been reluctantly holding back. And that was also right in front of me, is the responsibility that, because I've been living away from my family since I was a kid. So even though in my brain I imagined it, it's sped up in the last couple years. And what was right in front of me now is that this responsibility from my parents and my family that, again, I have always somewhere inside of me in my mind accepted since I was a kid. Ever since I was a kid, even now, I think what's weird about this entire thing that I mentioned that might be blurred by optimism and denial is that I've always, since I was a kid, and again, even up until like a month ago, before I had this shift, I always projected this taking of responsibility into the future. Like, yeah, at a certain point in the future, because I had a separate life, but I always imagined that I would return to this responsibility. So I always knew it was my responsibility to take. And I always, since a kid, and again, even up until a month ago, before I had this shift, I always projected the taking of the responsibility into the future. Like, yeah, at a certain point into the future, I will become responsible for my parents. And, something that I've known for a while, my family has trusted me to take care of my father's estate. So similarly, sometime in the future, I knew I would attend to those matters. It's just the reality of life. And again, blurred by my optimism and denial and whatever else. Because I take responsibility for these things already, but almost like one step removed from actually taking the responsibility. And that's kind of what I mean by projecting it into the future. And what's weird about this thing, even up until a month ago, regardless of what reality I've been facing for the last year, but because of the blur by optimism and denial. The way I describe it, because again, I've taken responsibility, but I've still been one step removed from that responsibility. And what I mean by that is, even though it's been right in front of me, being one step removed was that next step in my maturation. And the way I describe it is, I already managed all my father's finances and estates, but as a manager, if you can imagine, I kept it at management level and left executive decisions to my father after presenting him facts and options like a manager would. And again, because of my optimism, I stayed as a manager because I always, over the course of this poor health year for my father, I always thought he'd regain strength and regain interest and start telling me what to do with all these things. Because, again, I've spent my entire life apart from them, so it's not like I know any of his affairs. I have to learn everything, so if he doesn't take a part in telling me some of them, it's a discovery mission, and that's what it's been. And again, not that I'm losing hope or optimism, but because of the extent of time and the reality of time passing and the implications of that on finances, where my father is spending away and the managing of his entire life while he's not paying attention, costs are just continuing to mount and decisions are continuing to be left pending. I realized, and the point of this responsibility being one step away, or so I thought, of where I kept it, gating the next step in my maturation, I've realized that all this projecting of my responsibility I was doing into the future. This thing I've thought about since I was a kid. And because I've been so comfortable maybe of that being something that I've always thought about being in the future, this, even what I thought about was in the future even a month ago, because I'm so comfortable with that thought, is now something, as of this shift, I realize is already here. That future that I've been so comfortable telling, that story that I've always projected my responsibility to, is here. And actually, like I said, blind to the reality by the blur of optimism, has actually already been here for a long time. You ever be the last one to find out something in the room that was obvious to everyone else? Yeah, that's what this is. I was blind to the responsibilities I was meant to start making and taking. And those executive decisions were for me to begin making. And to actually accept that what I thought was something I aspired to, which was to look after my parents, as something I aspired to for in the future. My entire life, that story that I've told. And I've grown so comfortable with it being that one step away. And time flies. There's already something at my doorstep. And actually, it's not optional. It's either me or no one else. It's either me or everything else stops. And that raising of stakes that responsibility that I can now see staring at me in my face that I have ignored for all too long. It changed. Since the shift, it changed the entire way I stand. And not to go down a different personal but very vulnerable rabbit hole, but it relates as to why I believe we need these reasons. Because over the past couple years, up until the shift, I haven't really felt I've had any of these reasons. Maybe why I've been holding back my growth. Like the story of the providing for your woman before, with the heat that she creates. Ever since I was 19, everything I've ever wanted to do and progress for was probably tied somehow to also taking care of my girlfriend at the time. I took responsibility early. And like the story, it forced me and led me to growth. A more rich life than I probably would have experienced alone. More meals, better meals, luxury apartments, vacations, views. All things that, as much as I would like to say I love myself enough to have provided and would have provided for myself regardless, I still believe that I only experienced all those things because I had a companion for whom I also wanted to provide the views and experience for. And that in itself led to my growth. It set baselines for what was acceptable for me to earn and what lifestyle I expect myself to maintain. And maybe I wouldn't have had that drive or internal pressure to bud, as I call it, if I didn't take on that responsibility. And I end this story in a sad way because over the past couple of years, after a lot of issues in my relationship and my no longer painting a picture of a future where I see the woman being the same source of drive for me, heating up the room for me, and again, sadly, maybe me not being enough of a drive for myself, which is the sad part. In the past couple years, since all those issues, I've probably earned the least I've earned in my entire working career since I was 16 years old. Now, that could be coincidental because I quit my job and had a turbulent couple years. But I think all coincidences have some clues. And there's probably some sad truth to the fact that because I lost my reason and drive, and I didn't find it in myself, that I sort of drifted into a world where money held no utility. I'm not broke. I have money. I have no reason to make excessive amounts of it. And I shared my sad but true vulnerable realization to tell you and reaffirm how I feel once now on the other side of finding that reason again and having to provide for my parents. And now the thought does go through my head. Is it like switching addictions? When you give up one drug and you just use the other one? And maybe the best place would have been to find those reasons within myself. That would be the healthiest. And I need therapy for that. To provide a life for myself should be enough of a drive. That should be enough for me to earn and push for the standards and the luxury that I want for myself. But because I'm a simple man, and because my drives have always been to feed more than I eat myself, that no matter how broken I may seem, and I'm not prescribing this brokenness, only that the lesson still stands, that the reasons are required. And in me finding that reason, and hopefully I can one day attune that reason to myself, but the fact remains that reasons are required. And in the realization that the projection of my responsibility was foolishly being put off into the future, whereas it was actually already for me to take, now renewed a reason for me to live, a reason for me to operate again, a reason for me to wake up, a reason to look forward to. And again, all I'm saying is, without the sustaining reason, without a reason that is bigger than ourselves, and even though it seems broken in the way I told the story, the reality is that our why does need to be greater than our adversity. And usually our reasons do need to transcend just what results we can deliver to ourselves. And I'm not saying that those reasons must be grandiose, but they must be durable enough under the barrage of attacks that come from the discouragement of reality at times. That they have importance enough within themselves, that have enough integrity enough within themselves to withstand those attacks. So in a way, I found that reason again. And other than similar ones that I have that should mobilize me just as much for myself. And to give back things that I want to do in the world that are still greater than myself. This current reason points to clear, actionable steps to be taken. Aim at heaven, but start at home. And I can't help but consider this as a part of that upward trajectory. But zooming out of my situation to the broad lesson to bring home for you by reiterating that we need some transcending reason that allows for that internal pressure inside of us to take its natural course without our human tendency to suppress it in the seeking of comfort. That internal pressure can only build and boil enough if we have an internal reason that is greater than the pressure of the outside environment. So the force on the inside is greater than the force on the outside. The inside force imposes more of its will into what is and what is to be than the outside has. And that reason that is bigger than it, that outside pressure, that reason, that internal pressure that's bigger than it, is what calls for growth. It can only happen because it believes what is inside that is coming to be improves upon the current state in providing for survivability and expansion. Muscle grows under a survival response. Muscle grows under a survival response. You have to put it under so much strain that it feels it needs to grow in order to survive and in order to operate under the load you constantly put on it. It grows to survive. And even in that, You still have to consciously choose to go down the hard path every time to get the most muscle growth. The slowest, the most painful, the most under tension path promotes most survival response for growth. So when we admire people with large muscles or growth in any aspect of their life, we casually overlook the constant strain, the time under tension they must have put themselves under to appear in front of us in the manifested form that looks worthy of bearing a load, that looks competent in bearing a load. The point is, we have to create a need if one doesn't exist already. Like the overheated discomfort of a room that forces us to seek and provide for the growth and comfort for the next level of us. Or we stay where we are, dormant and deteriorating. We need this internal pressure and the survival response it creates by the strain it puts on our current selves so we can form and transform into what we are meant to be that is better suited to handle that pressure. And if you're smart and if you want to keep growing in life, you keep that pressure on. You progressively overload every aspect of your being so you continue to see growth. That load, that responsibility that you carry is what brings out what is necessary. That's when what is needed shows up. My family, may there be abundant reasons that you require for that growth to always deliver you constant renewal in life. May you find those reasons and accept them abundantly. Love you. See you the next show. Please share the show.